Well, good evening from Scotland. Hi there, Fleetside. How are you doing?
Good, Paul.
And hi everybody for joining us. It's yes, this is not the Eric Cozy channel. We had a slight technical hitch which caused us to start a couple of minutes late, but that was all my fault. And if I make a mistake, I own up. I admit to it.
We will blame you.
Well, as I was explaining, I use the StreamYard. It's very handy for use as a teaching tool for when I'm obviously not able to go to pupils. And I've got two videos set up at the moment. This one and one that I use for the pupils, and it was still on the pupils one. So I'm sat here and I'm thinking, I don't see Mark yet, so I don't see anybody coming in on the making any appearances, and then all of a sudden I get a message from Mr. Fleetside here saying, "Join, I'm here, I'm online." So anyway, that's all sorted out. That's it's no. Yes, this is, as I say, Julie. This is not the Eric Cozy channel. If Eric Cozy starts on the right day, then you have to be thankful. But anyway, we're not here to bash Mr. Cozy. We are here though to look at part 5 you've put together of this analysis of truth analysis. And what's the title of this 5th one?
This one's called On Adjusting the Lens. And
yes,
of course, we had to put this one together because I think you were running out of things to do there. You were starting to make music and stuff, so we thought,
yeah,
focus on Avery, which I do support music for sure.
Yes,
great stuff.
Okay, so do you want to pop? Yeah, I'll jump to pop up the first slide.
Yeah, if you wouldn't.
Let's do that, and then yeah, let's do that.
So this one's the title slide, I guess we're going for there.
Yes. Okay, there, slowly but surely. There we go.
There should be 2 searchlights. So this one's this is part 5, adjusting the lens. If you wouldn't mind advancing the next slide.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Talk about what we've done to date.
Absolutely, yes.
So as you mentioned, this is part 5. We did a part 1 called Quest for the Holy Grail, in which we talked about various camps of truthers out there, and the nature of speculation and sound analysis, and the notion of burdens of claims. So that was on March 3rd. Then we got into part 2, Two Truths Are Told. And there we were talking about the merit in the macro lens, the macro view, and the consequence of under targeting, and the notion of where does an unnatural or an I guess deeper focus on the micro, where does that take us versus the macro perspective. Then part 3 we talked about probity and analysis on managing the Great Divide. That's where I introduced this idea of the X and Y curve, where we can analyze to advantage, or we can analyze based on probity, sound analytic method. In other words, honesty or truth. And that was on March 17th. Part 4, we got into here's what's broken, and justice and the other institutions. We talked about the institutions that we're depending on here, namely government, the courts, and law enforcement, and looked at some of their constitutional underpinnings, their mission, vision statements, and introduced this idea that the truther, or the public in general, is a participant in integrity of the system, and we talked about the reasonable person test. These institutions are there to maintain confidence in the reasonable person. So this one today, part 5, and here we are, April 2nd. So on adjusting the lens, and this is about finding the story. If you wouldn't mind advancing one more. So these are this is the essential contents what we'll talk about today.
Sure.
The notion of when we're researching, is it are we thoroughly fulsomely researching, or are we in some cases distracting from a larger question? And then part B, prosecution or persecution. Those are two different words for a reason, and question as to where we sit in the Stephen Avery case.
Yeah.
Then part C, get into some poignant questions to tease out the macro perspective. Part D, I'll give you my take on the answer, and we'll wrap up some conclusions after that on E.
Sure.
So the next slide.
Yes.
So the core. I'll start off with the micro perspective. KZ and most of the truthers are a lot of us anyway are focused on the micro perspective, and very important work. As we had said over and over again, a lot of great research being done on all different avenues here, and it's very important to have that base of people digging in to provide information, provide processing power, providing data. So the truthers are a tremendous strength. The court process, on the other hand, is as interesting as it is, in my submission, is rather narrow in scope by design, by court design. And it's specific. It's contained within a limited context, so it doesn't look at a broader picture. It's nestled in the specifics of the argumentation associated with the trial that's being appealed, and so it's fairly tightly scripted in this narrow vein. It's limited by procedure and protocol for good reason that relates to the conduct of law, but it doesn't suit our purpose in terms of bearing down on this larger moral question. And notwithstanding all the stellar work done by Ms. Zellner in moving this forward, she's limited for other good reason to argumentation such as the Denny argument, the Brady violations. So Denny relating to the idea that someone else may have done this, and the judge at the time had determined that it should be narrowed only to a question of Stephen Avery. Brady violations, the idea that exculpatory information, or evidence that should have been turned over to Stephen Avery counsel was not. That was the argument. There's also argumentation on new testing. There's something that hadn't been tested before, and so a new avenue of inquiry, new technology that didn't exist before, so another orientation to new inquiry and new evidence. So it's a very narrow, this rabbit hole that we're going down. The legal process is a very narrow vein of what is, in my view, a much larger moral question. And I shouldn't forget also she's also arguing the destruction of evidence.
Yes.
Was evidence indeed destroyed that is key to her process. So a very narrow band of reasoning, isolated in context, going down that particular rabbit hole, and we're all hoping that Ms. Zellner can use the thin edge of the wedge to somehow, through that narrow rabbit hole, dismantle a mountain of intrigue here. But it's safe to say that the truthers are following a larger moral question than is being tested in the court procedure right now.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And the consequence of being tethered to that court process, for those of a mind that we should be behind that process and simply following that process, it is quite disconcerting to see the slow movement, some of the argumentation that comes back that appears to us to be irrational. We've got the risk that on procedural grounds or clever argumentation, somehow this notion of being able to get this added information that would allow us to test the Stephen Avery guilty question will be sort of pushed down the road and buried. And it leaves it a very dissatisfying observation. So the point in this is there's a distinction to be drawn between legal process and moral process, two different things. And I think the truthers are focused on the moral cause that is much larger that I'll get into. So the next slide, the research or distraction. So these are some of the themes. That's the one.
Sure.
So these are some of the themes that recur. I just grabbed some off the top. Obviously, a huge one that consumed our interest. I think off the top, in fact, there was Stephen Avery innocent or guilty? It may have been where the question was there something we missed, and I don't know any truthers that are on that page anymore. No, remember the fence sitters that used to be there, but there's been so much information uncovered by the truthers that I just don't see that the fence sitters, people that are uncertain. But certainly the who killed Teresa Holbach is the key question that's battered around. There's the one or two Ravs question. I'll get into some of these a little further. There's some in there that suggest they don't accept conspiracy theories and therefore they stay grounded in the simpler argumentation. We talked a bit about that in an earlier presentation. There's the dead or alive theory. Now, I haven't heard the alive theory take on much steam recently, but for a while there, that was garnering some attention. And of course, the Brady violation, the work with KZ. So the concern I had with the work KZ, with KZ, so certainly we want to work and support KZ, and in addition to that, we have to test this larger moral question that she is not permitted through the official process to bear down on. So it's important that we, for contextual reasons, that we look at this bigger picture. And the question at the bottom there, are we turning over the right rocks? So as consistent with these five, now almost completed five, trying to persuade some attention to the larger question without diminishing the good work of the micro avenues of study that are really uncovering great things.
Sure.
So the big thing is this idea of the moral question. Is there a moral impropriety? And in that we keep in mind the part 4 discussion, what our institutions are there to do. So this slide that you have, this hideous yellow, looks like an exponential curve that I've drawn.
Yeah.
This is, if I had to take MAM 1 and MAM 2, and all the good stuff that's done to date, to me, this in one slide summarizes where my head is focused. Yes. For some to take away is on the whodunit. But mine is not focused there. Mine's focused on this. Put it into one slide. You see at the bottom the 40-year elephant that we refer to, the elephant in the room, signifying that this thing is huge and obvious. And it also signifies that people on the other side don't want to look at it. It's almost as if the argumentation, the counter argumentation coming back at us is denying the obvious. So hence the elephant in the room discussion. So you go along the bottom from 1980 to 2020. So there's 40 years of intrigue, starting at the beginning of that to the Sandra Morris case. And if you recall, there were particular relationships that then enabled some would call a disproportionate response. And that's where Stephen Avery got into trouble off the start. And it was by virtue of suspected anyway, to be by virtue of individuals that knew each other and had inroads to the police station, and certain players in Manitowoc Manitowoc law enforcement that took a potentially disproportionate response.
Yeah. I think we're talking about, in particular, Sandy Morris was a close friend of Judy DeVerbage.
Yeah, that's right. She was the sort of, as the story goes, the conduit into certain law enforcement officials. So question of proportionality, whether this could have been treated differently. Mm-hmm. But the next point became rather, so that's Penny Bernstein, the second point, and there's a speculation there that this was purposeful conduct. So some truthers have walked down the road to uncover the possibility that this was engineered. And if that were the case, if that was demonstrated to be the case, then that has implications to certainly the damages that Stephen Avery was talking about later. I'll get into those a little bit, unpacking the 36 million. But so it has significance to the damages. That also has significance to public safety, because while Stephen's incarcerated, the perpetrators out free to do other things. So sort of in the public interest, public safety perspective, there were two problems with that in the moral equation. So then along came the next point of the next question mark on propriety or probity in the process was the withhold on the Gregory Allen information. So once the information came, this would have been exculpatory evident information that would have been, had it been in the hands of Stephen Avery's counsel, would have taken his interests in the courts down a different road. But there was a purposeful, it would appear, or it's alleged that there was a purposeful withhold that added 8 years to the sentence. So a manipulation of those sound foundations of the institution again, followed by then of course the subject of making a murder, the Teresa Holbach situation, and alleged by some truthers to be purposeful in nature. Now we don't know enough, notwithstanding all the good research, to be able to definitely state what exactly happened there to Teresa Holbach, but we certainly know the consequence for Steve, and the notion, the point I'm trying to pick up here is that certainly, whether framed or otherwise, there's a question on the table as to those that incarcerated them, whether they knew or certainly ought to have known that they were barking up the wrong tree, so to speak. And we'll add to that Brendan Dassey, who became a collateral point of damage in order to maintain Stephen Avery, a plausible storyline that ended up with the incarceration of Stephen Avery. So Brendan became collateral damage to the quest for Stephen, is the allegation there. And then the next data point in our curve is the evidence concealment. So this whole process that Zellner is pursuing is simply to get information that will either confirm where the state has gone or deny it. And keeping in mind that request for transparency is, as we talked about in part 4, part of the constitutional underpinning of the court. So this idea of public confidence that turns on decisions that, in the reasonable person test, makes the right calls, and so the public has confidence in the notion of justice. So certainly unnatural concealment of information goes against that grain, and we should add in this particular case too, on this data point, this was sanctioned by the court. So to date, this concealment, this isn't just a law enforcement and Manitowoc action, or expanding to Calumet. This is actually the court sanctioning the withhold. And the last point in there, the destruction of evidence, is another data point. intrigue. I would say manipulation, but we'll leave it as a question, as intrigue. This too, the bones and the destruction of evidence, was sanctioned by the court, given that they haven't made a call and they've argued to the contrary. So KZ's had to walk that extra mile on this question. And someone would argue that this is sanctioned by the government, given that this has gone to the governor. He is apprised of the situation and
One would hope.
knows or ought to know.
Yeah.
So the point in this is not only are there's 6 data points that I talked about, but there's this doubling down as we go, and the notion that so you'll see in my on my slide there at the bottom, I've got I don't know if people can read that. It's might be hard to read, but on the second data point, I've got alleged purposeful conduct.
Let's see if I can do this, if that helps.
And then on the second point is yeah. So on the Penny Bernstein, I guess that remains an allegation whether that was engineered. Was it a purposeful conduct? On the
it's something that if it did happen, people really don't want to contemplate that, do they?
No, they don't.
People would go to those lengths, but we know we have eyewitnesses saying that within seconds of the attack, there were police on that area of the beach.
Right. And this is, and Bogota had done a nice expose on that. There's an awful coincidence in there, but for the point of this slide, I'll leave it as an alleged. Who knows? In the second data point, though, where I have a concealment of exculpatory evidence, that I don't know how that could be argued as other than a purposeful act. So the parties knew that information was there. It was intentionally suppressed and resulted in 8 years of injustice. So you're going from yellow to then in the orange, the wrongful incarceration for the Teresa Halbach circumstance. The allegation that's coming forward from truthers, I think, is that of a purposeful, a framing, and people knew or ought to have known. On up to the concealment, purposeful conduct, court sanctioned up to the red. So the idea of the colors there, it's like a heat map. You're getting into more and more intense range. The follow the yellow brick road. This little curve increases exponentially, which brings us to the 36 million. So the 36 million came from 1 million per year of the 18 years that Stephen Abrams was in prison wrongfully. And then they added to that, they doubled it, so another million per year punitive, that as a lesson to the system, so to speak, the system we're talking about and trying to define. But it was apparent at that point to the tune of 36 million, I would call that an upset exposure. So people would argue, well, he never would have got 36 million. But the reason that's significant is because when the stakeholders that were part of the decision to orchestrate and incarcerate, and assuming they did orchestrate, that's the exposure number. That would be the upset limit. They would run that to their insurance companies, and they would test that against the amount of the policies, and amongst the however many players. So there'd be a lot of mathematics going on, burning the midnight hydro, doing calculations to see whether they'd be made whole or not. So the 36 is a very important number. And then, of course, as you go, if this drawing is correct, that these are, ever intensifying manipulations, and of course, as you double down, you up the ante. So, what would it be today, right? It'd be off the scale. And the other thing we should mention about the $36 million exposures, the insurance companies were, if this were, argument is there that if these were in fact purposeful acts, this was engineered intentionally, this isn't within the sort of the norms of conduct. If somebody's acted outside the station of that institution we talked about. This isn't negligence. This is so. Question as to whether these policies would have covered, or whether the individuals would have been left to underwrite the damages that they're alleged to have incurred. And so just imagine that situation today.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is the story of MAM 1 and MAM 2, that it resides within this macro theater. And it's not about the micro question of, intriguing as it may be, of what happened to Teresa Halbach on October 31, 2005. Next slide.
Yes, I'm just going to reduce it slightly.
Yeah, the next one is
and then you can always zoom in.
That's visually intense, perhaps. I'll certainly talk people through it. So this is so again on the theme of prosecution or persecution, that we call this the snowball effect. But what appears to me to be happening as we wander down that yellow brick road, what starts as an individual vendetta, then gets spun into a Manitowoc level question. So the whole county is then responding on the Bernstein situation. And then you'll notice it's against the backdrop of the Avery bill. So upon 2003 and Avery's release, and then the initiative of government to launch what was to be called the Avery bill, and the name got changed. This is where Mark Dundrum had brought this forward, and it was coincidental, oddly enough, with Peg Lautenschlager's Attorney General. This got defeated in name. The bill got signed, but the name didn't hold.
Criminal Justice Reform Bill, did it not become?
Yeah. So it got signed into law, as I understand it. But the name is to hold Avery's name, and this is where the fortunes for Stephen Avery started to sink at another level, right? So the actions in the 2005 leading to the incarceration 2006. This is a larger elephant operating. This isn't. We're past Manitowoc. Certainly, one could argue Calumet got involved and played along, perhaps the thin blue line.
Well, certainly the upper echelons of Calumet, wasn't it? It was Pagel, the investigators. I think the genuine sort of Calumet officers, they were embarrassed. By what was happening, but as you say, they just went along, didn't they?
So they would have interests in common, right? So just coincidentally pulling for the same benefit. But these larger organizations are becoming vested in the outcome, and certainly, as time moves on, we're now at the state level, and certainly with Brendan Dassey, this, as we mentioned before, this was tested at the Supreme Court, and we saw, or some of us anyway, had questioned the probity of what happened there. And keep in mind also, when Stephen Avery was appealing the Bernstein case, he was denied all the way up, as far as I know, he was denied all the way up to the Supreme Court.
Of Wisconsin, wasn't it?
And so they these larger bodies are aware, and you can see in the case of the Bernstein situation where DNA freedom, and it turns out that notwithstanding the appeal where he should have prevailed, the system failed him. But the point in this slide is merely that we're going from individuals to counties to state.
Yes.
It begs a question as this moves forward: are we bearing down on justice, or are we just triggering a larger response?
Mm-hmm.
So the next slide is what I would refer to as the given
the flow chart.
Is that what we have going on here? Going from local vendetta to another wrongful conviction to the engineered concealment, the manufacturer wrong conviction, suppression of transparency, tactical subterfuge, books written, all this sort of thing. The engineered testimony of Brendan Dassey, using this read technique, or in perhaps the argument that truthers had that this was basically dished out, and he parroted back what they wanted to hear. Eventually got recorded and was introduced as evidence to inculpate Stephen. So where is, in this whole drama, where is the principle? Where is justice? Where's fairness and transparency? Those lovely principled words. It's certainly very tactical. It's a tactical design of preservation, and a key moral question is also that it's done on the public dime. So, is this a machine at all cost, with public funding, to protect itself? That's almost, you can't help when you look at 6 data points that line up the same way and have this intrigue of coincidence, that there's a larger question that somebody should be blowing the whistle and pulling everybody out of the pool, see what's going on here.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for truth and justice, you're gonna be hard pressed to find any of that in certain Wisconsin cases.
Yeah, and don't forget, now we're talking sort of the state level and broader players. You got the court involved, you got the state court. You'll soon have the Supreme Court. These are larger players, so if the snowball is expanding, and where do you ever get ahead of that to find justice is the question. So the next slide is our house without a foundation.
Yes,
we introduced this earlier. So we can see that law enforcement and the courts and government are working collegially and seem to be, affairs are conducted and things are moving forward in day-to-day life. But meanwhile, if the foundation is out, if that principled obligation is not observed, then where's its moral compass? What is it? Is it freewheeling to interests, or what is going on there? And these are the more intriguing questions in the macro theater. Is there, institutional malfeasance? Is it planned and calculated? Recurring and reinforcing, leveraging expanding systems as required to protect itself. It'll reach out and taint as required to maintain storyline. And it would seem clear in our XY diagram that they are featuring X, tactical advantage, over the Y, the principled purpose of those institutions.
Yeah, I think that one that you've listed there, the systems required to protect itself. I think that's a very good way of summarising it, isn't it? It is all about self-preservation as far as people higher up the food chain are concerned. It was interesting when we had this Ken Kratz sex scandal. He knew exactly how to try and play one side of the DOJ against the other. There were ones that were his friends, there were ones that he wasn't, and he was quite happy to try and use whatever clout he could to try and hide what had been going on. But there's no doubt it's exactly the same in certainly in this case, and probably lots of others.
Yeah, and I like the way you put that social play, and so the point I would like to get to is this is a game, and given that they've made it a game, part of the lesson here is we're playing a game. This is, but we'll get to that. The next slide, if you will, is going to get into some refer to as poignant questions. So given the 40-year trend, we're converging on justice and freedom for Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, or are we simply diverging? Are we triggering a larger rebound? It would seem every time we get an inch, a mile comes back at us. And in this bevy of malfeasance if we.
I like that. It's like I often refer to this ever-rising balloon that they're holding on to, and it's like, other people are coming along and adding a bit more fuel to that balloon so they can keep on going higher and higher, don't they?
Right. In some ways, as Mike Griesbach had pointed out in the Bernstein case, if I have this correct, that there was manipulation going on. So not only was Stephen Avery innocent, I think Mr. Griesbach also argued that the system manipulated that part of it and brought that to the attention of authorities to no avail.
Indeed.
So I'll get back to Mr. Griesbach in a moment. But so the macro questions then become what manipulations are underway today? So what is going on in this system? We've seen collateral cases. We mentioned before the Bembenek and the Ricky Hofstetter case. And undoubtedly, as we mentioned in one of the earlier podcasts, if the foundation is indeed out and this thing is freewheeling, the more you look, the more you'll find. So we're getting that balloon is way up in the air.
Other cases as well would be the Michael Funk case and the Michael Bell case, where there was just no acknowledgement by Brad Schimmel that anybody in a uniform had done anything wrong whatsoever, and that it was basically the victim's fault for getting shot by police. It's your fault because you were in the way.
There can be this idea of reverse engineering circumstances to evidence to maintain a narrative. The second question. Given the system is operating off its moorings, transparency is not permitted. So it's one thing to be off its moorings, but you can't even pull it back on. You're not allowed to ask questions.
Yes.
So it begs the question: what network is at play? Who's in charge, and what is its reach? In your balloon analogy, how far will they let this? You mentioned others coming in to add fuel. If they pull in cards to get this more fuel, how far does that extend? So your analogy, I like the balloon analogy. How does the overwhelming barter system of advantage work, and who benefits? Cui bono, for who benefits. If you follow the money and you follow the entitlement, you should be able to map this thing out. So by looking at the players per the earlier questions, you should be able to start to see the size and shape of this unidentified syndicate or organization or network or club or whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. And then if you follow the benefit, you should start to be able to see the frontiers of it. Question 4: how has the court become infected, and how long has this been going on? So I'm assuming that the court is, with Judge Flowers, as some refer to her as, not a very flattering name, but as a judge, we should be able to take her findings. We studied certainly the briefs that go in. We know what Zellner has argued, and to see the nature of the response, that's either going to build confidence in the reasonable person test that justice is being observed, or if it's not, then the question is why not? Mm-hmm. And it's simply that local vested interest has forced a bias in the courts, or is there something more sinister? I don't know. But
certainly in the case of Judge Sukowicz, she took so long to write just a few pages, about a dozen pages. It took her about a week to write each page. One suspects that she went on the same speed writing course as Andy Colburn.
Yeah. Well, it's strange.
Yes.
Paradise. So you can see newspeak and you can see tactical language, and I'm sure we've all, when it suits our interest, we've all had the ability to capture things in a sort of narrow vein of reasoning and unnatural argumentation, just to try and defend a position. But this is pretty awkward drafting, and it's done in broad daylight with everybody watching. So I'm surprised that someone doesn't take the brief and compare it to the response and sort of drill that into every law school throughout the planet. I mean, it's great fodder for the justice question. Make a great case study.
Absolutely. Yep.
So the next question 5. So this is the game piece. Is overlooking justice merely a game of politics or something greater? So we've talked about the notion that the system in Wisconsin and the U.S. in general, the notion of elections for some of these key officials has a dynamic where or arguably, it can be argued that it has a dynamic where people decide based on popularity. And certainly, as we studied on, I think it was the last podcast, we looked at some of the safeguards that are in the constitutionality of these of the judiciary, for example, to try to offset that or guard against an unnatural leaning there. But politics in that sense suggests that you've got that normal politicking argument, but it could be something greater than that. There are huge kingpins in Wisconsin, big business drivers. And when I was referring to cui bono and following the advantage and the money, it wouldn't take much of a study. And this is some place where Chad Keller had done a lot of great.
I think there's a saying, isn't there, that Wisconsin courts are some of the best courts that money can buy. And it's like, it's more than just politics, but it's particularly it's not wanting to expose any more of what's going on, isn't it? It's right. Damage limitation.
Oh yes, if for everybody concerned, apart from Stephen, if this could be made to go away. So then on the 6th, where institutional safeguards are defeated, how does the land of make-believe protect societal interests, right? So if this is off its foundation and freewheeling, what happens to local society? Are they living in perpetual fear? Are they under some kind of an unnatural domination? They seem to be happy. In that nobody's speaking out. Is that under duress or?
Yeah, I have a certain sympathy with residents of Manitowoc. They've got a sheriff's department. They can't call the A-team.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of them in Manitowoc, Wisconsin in general, know what's going on. But
yeah, can you imagine the tyranny if what we're pondering here were true? I don't know how day-to-day life works in a community like that.
Yep.
Strange. Okay, so then question 7, how has the mainstream media become infected? So we talked about the media. I certainly gave you my thoughts on the mainstream media. If you look, for example, at the COVID circumstance currently and the pressure being put on Trump, where the mainstream media has us focusing on the question of was the response fast enough and sufficient enough, which to me is not I mean, that's interesting history, but the media has us focused there. I think the larger question on COVID are things like certainly you want to know about the health and safety risks, but you're also suspending your civil liberties here. So you've willingly passed everything over the fence. This is now martial law without having it imposed. And so, but we won't get too far off the Stephen Avery thing, but you can see how the mainstream media, for all its wonders and wonderful people and these bird dog journalists, they somehow all come to one theme. It's one side of a theme, and it's incessantly pushed. So yes. And the theme for Stephen Avery in the mainstream media is right now silence, and before that was parroting the official word. As anybody, Mr. Kratz, as he cared to dish it out, they would lap it up and then pour it onto the page.
Well, absolutely. I mentioned obviously last week about that journalist Dan O'Donnell, who is one of the ones that you briefly see him in parts of episode 1 of Making a Murderer, and again, it's so typical of him to come out bashing, everybody involved in local government in Wisconsin, attacking Governor Evers just because he's of a different political party. And it's like, come on, this is COVID-19 we're talking about. Even in the UK here, you've got all the political parties all in agreement on what needs to be done and what they're trying to do. The same here in Scotland. You don't need people, as you say. You can look back on it in years to come and say, this should have been done differently, or that was done well. But now is not the time to try and make political gain out of
exactly. Yeah, and it's a good observation on the mainstream media. So certainly, I, for one, am disappointed in how they play. They're a vital link in informing the public so that the reasonable person will have confidence in the justice system to pass that reasonable person test.
Yes.
They're the missing link, and boy, are they missing. So that's part of our snowball of intrigue. This is a larger and larger system as we move forward. So point 8 is, so that's the next slide. To me, the most fascinating of the people here is Mr. Griesbach.
Yes.
So as I understand, he is a very honorable, respected, eloquent speaker. He, as I had mentioned earlier, not only brought forward the notion that Stephen Avery was not guilty, but also dredged up this yellow brick road up until that point. So this, picture the yellow curve up to up until 2003 roughly, and somehow coincident with the Peg Lautenslager's intervention on squaring off against that Avery bill, or doing something, and I don't know, but there was a coincidence. Suddenly, he seemed to have a different view on the new case, and I think if we quote him directly, he indicated to the effect that they got it right. This time they got it right, something like that. And so this is a fascinating individual to be able to sit down and talk to if the opportunity ever had. How on earth, what I'm struggling with is how, in the face of that yellow brick road up until then, I mean, that was enough. That was $36 million worth of an $18 million punitive to rationalize that the foundation's off the house to that extent. And then to suddenly suggest that all that went away and we can have confidence in what happened in the new case, I'm having a hard time squaring that perspective. How on earth do you do that? And particularly in the wake of what MAM 1 and 2 brought forward. And in addition to that, what all the truthers have brought forward, what KZ's brought forward in her briefs, it'd be interesting to try and capture him today to say, does he still hold that view, and how on earth I'm really struggling with that one. But I always thought he was a fascinating character to want to get more information from, let's say.
Well, I think we'd certainly like to hear. We'd like to know what sort of conversations he had with his older brother, Judge William Griesbach.
Yeah.
That would be most interesting.
Like, what on earth? So from we may not have complete context, but just trying to understand how Mr. Griesbach pivoted from and against all information that was on the table, and today, is he still pivoting? So same with Mark Gundrum, for example. You can see him equivocating after the fact. He couldn't go forward with Stephen Avery's name on the bill. He had to go forward with the bill. He didn't come to Avery's defense, obviously, but he also didn't appear, in my mind, to be clearly indicating that he supported the guilt verdict. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading. I think he's a circuit court judge these days. I'm not quite sure where he is.
He is a member of this District 2 of the Court of Appeals. He is one of the 4 judges that will be looking into Stephen's case.
Yeah,
as it goes forward.
He's similarly interesting to have a beer with.
I mean, also what was interesting when the depositions were being taken in Steve's, civil suit. You've got Mark Roher, who ended up being the district attorney, even though Mike Griesbach won the election, and yet decided to not become district attorney, to simply be an assistant attorney. And you think, well, why would you do that?
Mm-hmm.
And then when they're talking about the fact that they're discussing with the sheriff's department and various people going to various meetings to discuss this appalling wrongful conviction of 18 years, nothing is minuted.
Right.
He hasn't got a clue who was at any of these meetings. They have no idea what was said. It just beggars belief, doesn't it?
So it sounds like a club.
Well, it's very much so, yes.
Like if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck. So no matter how you slice and dice this thing, you keep coming back to this impression that there is a syndicate of sorts or something that operates to a different gravity than is established within the official halls of those institutions of justice and law enforcement and government. There's something piggybacking off the side of this thing. Yeah. So, which brings me to question 9.
I like this one. Can I just say that,
right,
I have never ever referred to it as a justice system. But anyway, read it out because
so if justice is simply to be outmoded through tactics of convenience and transparency is no longer an entitlement, shouldn't we remove the term justice from the emblem and just call it the system, right?
Legal system.
System. I think from now on we just call it the system. I'm not sure that I'm having trouble with the justice part.
In fact, do they not call it the program?
Yeah. It's got a program. Whose program is it, and how does it operate?
Yeah.
And then the 10th question is, how do we voice this and to whom? Which is, so what do you do with this information? There is no, as we talked before, there is no procedure to bring this challenge. Here we are with all this yellow brick road, 40 years of dredged up. I'll keep it as a question, alleged malfeasance, and there's no place to take that. The court the court procedure is very narrow, as we had said, so this is in no way testing the moral question. This is simply testing the legal minor semblance of the problem.
Yeah, one suspects that you're talking about 40 years. One suspects that there's history that goes back even further, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, this is
it's institutionalized, isn't it? The way they.
Yeah, and I know that. So Chad had I guess I could call it a colorful podcast recently, and if we get past some of the delivery approach,
yeah,
he's a fascinating mind to tap on some of this stuff, but I think all truthers, for my little part, just persuading that we encourage some of the truthers to follow their lead in the macro theater, not to be unduly limited to the micro look. I think this larger picture, the idea of draining the swamp, you got to find out what this is by character. So the next slide, the answer, he says, as if he's got the answer, right? So part D is that all this intrigue goes away if only we read this slide. So there's a saying at the top, an adage: you can't play the game to win and then complain about the game, and then complain about the game. So at any arbitration, or is this the case in contract law and sort of the notion when you play into a game, you accept the rules of the game, and you can't, morally or in some cases legally, pull away from it and say, I lost, and therefore complain about the rules. The time to complain about the rules is at the entry gate. You sort of acquiesce if you walk down the road. So I was thinking that would be appropriate in some ways for the truthers. If all we do was follow the court case, then we sort of acquiesce to that larger elephant and in favor of accepting that Stephen Avery's fate and the larger moral question will be tested through this narrow vein of reasoning in the courts. And I feel that's not, obviously in my view, there's a larger, the moral question is huge compared to the line of reasoning we're testing under that court case. So my suggestions, change the lens, see it as a game. So it is a game, we play the game. Define the network, as we had discussed. What is this thing? How does it operate? What does it work to? Raise the profile, the obligations, and confront the players. So we talked about 2 players there. There's a series of them, and Paul, you're excellent at. You've been very good at picking up the phone and talking to some of these. I think if the truthers keep the narrative of these, I guess we call them guilters, or those that, those that have opined in an unnatural sense, if we cause them to speak a little more, and let's shine the light that way, and have some dialogue. Work in parallel with the micro court process. So by all means, continuing to help KZ. Excellent research going in. She's benefited from some of the work of the truthers, and that's vital. But rather than work behind KZ or through KZ, I would suggest work in parallel. You've got a much larger freedom the truthers have a much larger moral freedom to debate. Yeah. As long as, as we mentioned in the past, we use those Queensberry rules of fine analysis. We do it responsibly. And then the last point there, continue the truther inertia. So it'll be interesting with this current situation, the COVID-19 situation, whether that will now consume a lot of the attention and how much will be reserved for the Stephen Avery thing, and also the extent to which that will drag out the process or in any way curtail the process. I don't know how they curtail it, but certainly I don't see timelines being observed on this thing that we've been banking on.
Yeah, I think it's just a case of they will drag their heels as much as they possibly can, won't they?
They will, and unfortunately with COVID-19, all institutions will be doing that. So they finally got a more reasonable argument than they've had in the past. But anything to drag this, and we've said before, justice delayed is justice denied. The TikTok is happening for Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey as well, as their lives become consumed. So the conclusion is the next slide.
Yep.
And what I was going to suggest analytically, this notion of holding to 2 thoughts simultaneously. So we have this tremendous penchant. Humans have this tendency to want to take shades of gray and render it black and white and decide, and that's part of their auto navigation system, perhaps. There may be good reasons why they do that. But in instances like this, I would suggest keeping all data points on the storyboard, and by all means focus on your preferences. Give that more time and energy as you feel appropriate, but don't remove some of the theories that have been reasonably argued. So, for example, two examples are the alive dead and the one rav or multi ravs. So in the alive dead, the alive theory may seem pretty crazy, but I'm not sure that it's any crazier than the dead theories of the official narrative.
Yes.
And you've got two crazy theories, and I'm not sure the basis upon which, out of etiquette or whatever, would drive someone to say, no, I'm only going to consider dead theories. I would try to persuade that you at least leave the prospect on the storyboard. It's you know, don't create a wall that isolates you from reasonable analytic consideration. In the RAV situation, what's fascinating, so we know that you know, Richard Boyd had done some great analyses of the RAV, as had and a number of others.
Yes.
Rather than mention them, and I would say there's excellent analysis that would reasonably conclude, if you had to make the decision today, that would conclude the one RAV. There's also, though, excellent analysis that would conclude the multi-RAV. And so, but what's of added intrigue on the RAV is that this is a nested coincidence. So, so you've got the speculation that there might have been more than one RAV. You've also got that blue that suddenly, or green that suddenly became blue, coincidental with the tampered VIN number, coincidental with a salvage yard that Herman had, right? So you've got these nested coincidences of intrigue so for what it's worth, I would suggest in totality, those don't take anything off the storyboard. Don't
Absolutely.
and don't feel persuaded by others to close any doors.
Yeah, I think you're saying about the fact that, you know, we like to take shades of grey and paint them black and white, and life isn't like that, is it? It's not as straightforward as, you know, one thing or the other. It's
and this is what drives scientists crazy. So if you change subject and you're trying to look up quantum physics or time or or religion, or take any study of where science has been involved, this is what drives scientists crazy, because they always have to leave the prospect of the competing theories, right? You leave so that cognitive dissonance, the two different views, remains and manifests. It has effect on your psyche. It's far more comfortable to park it and go with one. So you remove that cognitive dissonance, but this is what causes you to wander around through the halls, muttering and lost in space, because you're simultaneously puzzled by competing theories. But so be it. That's science is not pretty. So the next slide is sort of the closing thought, and certainly take any thoughts or questions you may have. But so to me, I liken this to a theft in broad daylight. We can all see it going on. Problem is not for those who abuse office. That's to be expected, especially where the safeguards are compromised. So we should expect, if your safeguards aren't in place, normal human behavior will take over. And I think what I'm seeing of the other side in the Stephen Avery case is there's a hell of a lot of normal behavior going on that is not institutionally grounded in the underpinnings of what those institutions are there to do. That's the problem. So the problem is those complacent and letting it go on. That's the I think it's the public that idly sits by that's to be doing that reasonable person test. That's your problem. Complacency in there. Truthers conceptually are the antidote for corruption. Keep up the good work. So that's my spiel for today.
Yeah, very good too. I thank you very much. That's you're absolutely right about that kind of snowball effect of it just gets further and further up the food chain, doesn't it? Have you had a chance yet to watch? I know it only came out yesterday. It's the latest Netflix, How to Fix a Drug Scandal.
No, I'll have to.
You'll love it. It's so much. I mean, it's a completely different subject as opposed to Making a Murder is all about the attack of Penny Bernstein, and then the disappearance of Teresa Holbach. This is to do with people working in a crime lab. But you wouldn't believe the number of parallels. And within the first 15 minutes, I'm saying this Attorney General is completely immoral if she thinks that, you know, that they can limit this to just 2 cases. You know, these people have done have affected thousands and thousands of cases, and you're saying that there's only 2 that need to be looked at. It's like,
yep. You can probably kill that slide, Paul. I don't know whether they
yeah, sure. Sorry,
prefer to look at you and me or the slide, but I think that's exactly right. Like this, MAM 1 and 2 is not about the isolated circumstance of on the whodunit in October 31. It's a much larger circus, if I could, you know, and it's an expanding circus.
I must admit, I can be pretty naive at times, and I've said this before. When I was watching Making a Murderer Series 1, when it got halfway through, and you're getting past the halfway point, and you're thinking, when's this going to be all sorted out? When is somebody going to step in on the side of Stephen Avery that's actually going to do something? I mean, I certainly agree that, you know, Dean and Jerry had very little chance, given the fact that they were up against the state of Wisconsin and all their powers. But I think you're right. If there had been this army of truthers back then with the power of the internet, yeah, I think they would have got on a lot better.
Yeah, exactly. This is why the truther. I think MAM was the catalyst that gave Stephen Avery a new opportunity. KZ was another catalyst, and the third is the truthers. And I think this is the vital role that the truthers play. This is even if the pursuits of KZ were to languish in procedure and somehow be procedurally blocked, or hard to say where that goes, they still have to contend with the truthers. That's the part that ain't going away.
Yeah, if you wanted a good summary of both Making a Murder and How to Fix a Drug Scandal, that comment would apply to either case, wouldn't it?
Yeah, incredible. And other state players were sanctioned. Right. So this is very much like when Peg Lautenschlager. So coincident with Mike Griesbach's change in position and the change in Stephen Avery's fortunes, and coincident with the Teresa Halbach disappearance, you had the admonishment of past transgressions by Peg Lautenschlager, and in face of the yellow brick road that I had just that we all know about, and that would seem quite apparent. So there's, it seems to me that the gravity of honesty, it seems to be a different gravity than I'm used to. It's a different term. Maybe I'm expecting too much. Societies do have a problem maximizing the ideal, absolutely, but when things are glaringly obvious, then
Yes, I think we've talked about the fact that eventually the press the media will start to become a proper, do proper investigative journalism and not just be the propaganda machine of the state. And when that happens, then this huge tanker starts to change course, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is where the internet. So, I, for example, had mentioned, it's sort of done with the mainstream media 10 years ago, but this is where turning to the internet and forums such as this very forum, right? So this is your new news. You can take whatever you listen to in the mainstream media, and they'll all be the same wherever you shop. Or you can go out and have interesting discussion research and inquiry, and that's what the internet is permitting.
Oh, it's quite surprising actually, because as I say, when this COVID, when this sort of lockdown occurred here, I was already prepared for it, having done videos, already having used StreamYards, having previously used Google Hangouts.
Yeah,
And I mean, the idea, that 4 years ago that I would making videos about making a murder. I mean, that was just ludicrous, I mean, I tell you, I mean, I was one of the last people on the planet ever to buy a computer.
Yeah, and you see how suddenly you're prepared for it. I mean, it's just the internet it just blows me away. And if somebody told me when I was a kid that someday you're going to grow up to find the wonders of this thing called an internet, and what does it have? It has information.
Yes.
It just, but I'm just fascinated and it's through forums like this that it becomes important. You can listen to the mainstream media and see what's being dished out, but if you want to be analytically sound, objective, then you're basically receiving what someone else has prepared for you for other good reasons that don't bear on objective analysis. So yeah.
Here's another reference to, as I say, to how to fix a drug scandal, which could so easily be to do with Stephen's case.
Yeah, it was higher up. The information just moved to the other job. Yeah. So this is the risk reward thing, eh?
Yeah.
So scratching each other's backs. The fact that so if I was able to articulate, in assuming my yellow brick road curve is correct, the data points in there, and those aren't mine, those are others. I'm just borrowing. It's not like I uncovered anything there. But if that pattern is correct, how on earth would Peg Lautenschlager come to the conclusion, coincident with all the other wonderful things that got statused to the interests of the state? How did she come to the conclusion that there was no malfeasance, particularly when I think Mr. Griesbach himself was arguing that there was?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about it's something to do with the Attorney General's job title. That it's actually in the job title about the idea that overall one of their obligations is to try to save money for the state.
Yeah, so it's
actually in the sort of job description.
It's like a fiduciary responsibility to the public or something to save money, but that should be there should be a strong, not membrane, but a wall between that thinking and justice.
Exactly.
There would be no room legitimately. I mean, we could pull out their terms of reference, but there'd be no room for compromising on one to achieve the other. They wouldn't admit that anyway.
Yes.
It wouldn't be a legitimate pass card to say, well, we're going to save money, so we'll put, we can't afford to have Stephen Avery released and all this expense unleashed. That would be unconscionable and wouldn't be legitimate within their terms of reference, but they do it quite unofficially. And,
yes.
And they, per what you just put up there, appears to go on elsewhere.
Yes, I'm going to go back and watch some more of it. As I say, I haven't quite finished it yet, but it's a
drug scandal. I'll have to.
Yeah, it only came out yesterday, April Fool's Day. I must admit, my wife got me a beauty. We were going down to the shops, and she said, "You do realise that as of tomorrow, they are banning sales of alcohol." And I'm like, "What? Seriously?" And I was looking it up on my phone. About this banning of alcohol sales, from today onwards, And that's when I realized the date, April the 1st.
Yes. Yes, we're lucky here in Canada. Those stores are open. So it's one thing to battle deadly diseases. It's another thing to take your alcohol away.
Yes. That's one of the things in Wisconsin that Governor Evers has stipulated has to remain open.
Yeah.
I think in America they call them liquor stores.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the thought there is that those that are, what is the thought? Those maybe downtrodden or in need, they don't want to, add. I'm not quite sure how they rationalize keeping those open. I'm very, very glad they did.
Yes. Same here.
It's funny. We have beer stores and we have liquor stores in Canada, two separate entities, but both are open.
Is that because liquor is classed as the strong, your whiskies and gins and vodkas?
Yeah.
Whereas beer is just beer, isn't it?
Yeah, the poor man's sport.
Yes.
I see you with the odd beer every now and again. I think that's great.
We have some very good breweries here in Scotland, including McEwan's, that do a variety of different beers, and it's all very, very, very good stuff.
Excellent.
But just to say thanks once again for coming on and presenting this, and certainly it's the dead and alive theory. I wonder if the lawyers have to, like Steve Drizzen has mentioned, that he will not entertain any talk whatsoever.
Right.
That Teresa is alive, and one wonders if that's because of the restricted thing that he's doing. What he's dealing with, it's kind of restricted.
Yeah, and
you can't talk about it publicly, shall we say, or on the record, as it were.
Yeah, there may be a good and honorable reason for that. That he can't, sort of speak his mind. He might be right. Some have posited that he's got other priorities as well, other motivations, let's say. But at any rate, and from my standpoint, I don't see the wisdom in taking anything off the table that is reasonable and possible. And the minute I see any shaming into a certain position, that's exactly what I'm trying to to counter. So analysis and science is not a game of emotion, and you don't look or stop looking at a fear or concern for interest. No place for emotion, no place for advantage. You go where the data takes you, and but as we said before, you have to, part and parcel of going to that other place is the nature of the conspiracy that would require, and that's where the parsimony kicks in, the argumentation of someone with an extraordinary claim has to have an extraordinary explanation, a measured response. But beyond that, I don't see any doors. Notion closing any doors. Yeah.
Yeah. Disco pervert. Let's just put a comment up. We don't have a crime scene. That's the big problem.
Yeah.
We don't have a crime scene.
Well, you got a bobcat or whatever that was, that a backhoe or something that got rid of the crime scene in terms of the burn pit, if that's where you think it happened. But it defies physics and defies logic, right?
Yeah.
Those are the first clues that you should keep looking at, clues as to what happened. The official narrative defies physics.
It was interesting, going to Manitrock last year, and
shouldn't be silent. Yeah, I agree with that. And not to create any. Hopefully, the message there is to respect the views rightfully held by others.
This is Texas, 2 counties.
Yeah. Is that for Drizzen, I wonder? That's Travis.
Yeah. As far as Drizzen's concerned.
Yes, Travis has done some excellent work on the legal side. We've been, borrowing from his good thoughts in the previous podcasts. But if I understand this comment, he's saying, so the term I would use is knowing where your bread is buttered.
Yes. Yeah.
So that would be an example of advantage, and hopefully
Yes.
that doesn't have any suasion on the debates we're having. There should be no room for advantage or emotion.
Now, certainly, as I say, when I went to Manitowoc and we all went off to the Avery salvage yard, and we all sort of went down to look at the trailer, as if it's some sort of crime scene. Well, no, it wasn't. It was supposedly the last resting place of some of Teresa Holbach's bones, but the trailer itself is completely insignificant in the scheme of things. It's just happened to be a trailer that Stephen Avery resided in for.
Yeah, so just like as I was mentioning in the RAV, these nested coincidences, I probably wouldn't get too excited about an alive story were it not for the fact of the coincidence of the Carmen Boutwell disappearance. And these coincidences, and also the death certificate that was not only accelerated, but very odd. So the Holbach family reaction, the lack of a search, it would seem to me there's more to the story than I've been able to gather from the official accounts. And therefore these larger theories are. If just as I was saying in that snowball slide, if the magnitude of this thing is expansive and broad, then things like relocation, that's entirely within the realm of even a small circus, let alone a big one we're talking here. So that's that would they do it, could they do it, and did they do it being three different questions.
Yeah. Okie dokie. So, I think we've been, oh my goodness, nearly an hour and a half. So I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to go and get another one of my beers out the fridge, and
perfect.
We'll catch you again soon.
Yeah, thanks all, and thanks very much, Paul, for all that. Yeah.
I'll just say cheerio.
Stay safe.
Yes, thanks for joining us, and catch you soon. And that's it.